Three structures explain most of what post-traumatic stress does to a person: an alarm that won't switch off, a map that lost its timestamps, and a set of brakes that can't engage. I'm Dr. Padda. Let's go through the hardware. The amygdala is where fear is represented and processed. Think of it as your internal alarm system. It's supposed to fire when a threat is detected and mobilize your body to respond. That's a feature. In PTSD, the amygdala develops chronic hyper-responsivity. It fires not only to trauma-related cues, but to neutral, everyday stimuli. The alarm is stuck in the on position. Consider the metabolic cost of that. An alarm system running continuously burns energy, exhausts the organism, and floods the body with low-grade threat signaling around the clock. Patients describe this as exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix. And they're describing something real. And this chronic alarm activity is frequently fueled and sustained by systemic inflammation. That's the bridge between the psychiatric picture and the metabolic one, and it's why I treat these in the same building. The hippocampus handles learning, memory, and critically, context. It's the structure that tells you where and when a memory belongs. PTSD is reliably associated with reduced hippocampal volume and decreased neurogenesis. This helps explain the most distinctive feature of traumatic memory. It feels immediate and present rather than past. The contextual tagging that would file it as then is impaired, so the threat feels like now even when it happened decades ago. I need to be careful about causality here because this is usually explained badly. It is often presented as trauma shrinking the hippocampus. The evidence is more interesting than that. Gilbertson and colleagues studied 40 pairs of identical twins where only one had combat exposure. They found smaller hippocampi in the PTSD veteran and in his unexposed identical twin, which means smaller hippocampal volume is, at least partly, a pre-existing vulnerability factor, not purely damage inflicted by the event. Why does that matter to you? Because it means your brain was not destroyed by what happened to you. Some people are constitutionally more susceptible. That's a risk profile, not a wound, and risk profiles can be managed. Third structure, the medial prefrontal cortex, the brakes. Its role in trauma responses is fear inhibition, telling the amygdala the threat has passed and it's safe to stand down. In PTSD, you see hypoactivity in the medial prefrontal cortex, a functional failure of the braking system. The alarm rings and the brakes cannot engage. So the full picture is an alarm that's oversensitive, a map that can't place events in time, and brakes that don't work. Put those three together and you have someone who is genuinely, mechanically, unable to feel safe, regardless of what they know intellectually. That's why "you're safe now" doesn't help. The patient knows. The knowing lives in a system that isn't currently connected to the alarm. Restoring prefrontal function is one of the key predictors of recovery, and it is a primary target of evidence-based treatment. Now, the loop that makes this self-sustaining. Severe trauma triggers two damaging processes simultaneously: systemic inflammation and excitotoxicity, overactive neurons damaging themselves and the tissue around them. Together, these dysregulate the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which governs your stress hormone response. The cycle runs trauma and HPA dysregulation into a chronic stress state, into synaptic deficits and inflammation, into persistent pain feedback, which feeds back into the stress state. That loop is the biological engine of chronic pain. And notice it no longer requires the original event. It runs on itself. This is why "just move on" is not merely unkind advice. It's mechanically irrelevant. There's nothing left to move on from. The loop is the problem. Here's where I have to correct something that gets repeated too confidently, including in my own slide deck. You'll often hear that PTSD is characterized by low cortisol rather than high, the system supposedly exhausted from overwork. The actual evidence is more limited. A meta-analysis of 37 studies comparing 828 people with PTSD against 800 controls found no overall difference in cortisol. Lower cortisol showed up in specific subgroups: women, people with a history of physical or sexual abuse, and afternoon measurements. So it's a real finding within certain populations, not a universal signature of PTSD. And the adrenal exhaustion explanation isn't the best supported mechanism either. Enhanced negative feedback sensitivity fits the data better. I'm telling you this because I'd rather be accurate than dramatic. What is solid is the inflammation. Elevated pro-inflammatory cytokines, interleukin 1 beta and interleukin 6 among them, are consistently found in PTSD, confirmed by meta-analysis in Lancet Psychiatry. These molecules directly affect mood, cognition, pain perception, and sleep, which means this is not all in your head. It is measurable chemistry in your blood, and some of it is modifiable. One last mechanism, and it links this series directly to chronic pain. A healthy nervous system habituates. Repeat a non-threatening stimulus, and the system learns to tune it out. That's why you stop hearing the refrigerator. In PTSD, that process is impaired. The nervous system never concludes that the repeated signal is safe, so it responds at full alarm every single time. At the same time, it develops stress sensitization, autonomic hyperexcitability to novel or intense stimuli. Instead of recalibrating downward after a stress response, the threshold for the next response drops. The system gets more reactive with each activation, not less. This is the explanation for something patients report constantly and are rarely believed about: hypersensitivity to light, to noise, to touch. Attentional resources are being exhausted trying to process stimuli the nervous system cannot correctly label as irrelevant. You are not being dramatic. Your filter is broken, and a broken filter is measurable. Next video, how we measure all of this and how it gets rebuilt. If you are in crisis, call or text 988 or go to your nearest emergency department. Padda Institute Center for Interventional Pain Management, St. Louis, Missouri, 314-481-5000. Educational content only, not medical advice.